With that, let's transition to our next talk, which will be given by Sean Dougherty. And he'll be talking about lessons learned from sampler and Lunar farms.
All right. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
All right. Good morning or afternoon, wherever you may be. Yeah, I'm Sean Dougherty. I've been at Maxar for 21 years now, which on the robotics side actually started as a spinoff from NASA JPL. And interestingly enough, my first project there was for a commercial moon rover. We started 21 years ago. So this is exciting to me to see all this coming together finally. Before that, I did a short stint at NASA JSC and the EVA group as well, so it's also applicable. And I should point out this is not a typo for the title, Robotic Arms from the Mars to the Moon. I know the Artemis program is from the Moon to Mars, but in this case, we're going to talk about experience with Mars robotic arms and how that's being applied to the moon, specifically on SAMPLR, the SAMPLR Lunar Robotic Arm, which I'm the PI on. It is manifested to fly in 2023 on CLIPS Task Order 19C. So I love this image here. It shows the robotic arm we built for NASA's Curiosity rover. It shows it from an image being taken for the cameras we built for Malin Space Science Systems. In total, Earthlings have delivered 9 robotic arms to the surface of Mars. All of those have been from the US. 4 of those are currently still operating on the surface of Mars. We have 0 robotic arms currently operating surface of the moon. China has pretty recent experience with 2 of their systems. But for the US, you have to go all the way back to the 60s surveyor program to find this experience on the moon. So I'm excited we're finally talking about that. Still have a ways to go. I think the 2 arms talking about today, Cold Arm and SAMPLR, are the only 2 manifested right now for the moon. We see that change as the program, the lunar program in Artemis matures. This gives a good feeling for our recent robotics experience on Mars. We have a lot of experience in planetary robotics. It's not some far off science fiction thing. We do operations on the surface of Mars on a weekly basis, and that experience is directly applicable to the moon. So just to touch on some of the highlights, going back to Mars 01 program, that never flew. That was delivered to NASA in 1999. But what's interesting about that is that actually became the InSight robotic arm. Then in 2003, we launched the Mars exploration rovers. Those arms had several instruments on the end that helped show signs of past water on Mars. Phoenix lander robotic arm was a 4 degree of freedom system, and that was the first to actually touch water ice on the surface of another planet. Curiosity, we're helping, again, a lot of different instruments at the end that get placed. In this case, and actually on Phoenix too, we're able to acquire samples. That mission is discovering organics on Mars. InSight is in Science Laboratory is still operating. InSight's still operating as well. That had a slightly different mission about the interior Mars. And most recently, you might have seen very current news that we just acquired our first successful sample on Mars. And that one was exciting to me because there's actually two robotic arms on that rover, and they had to coordinate together, work together to get that sample. So that's really exciting to see. So hopefully that gave a little bit of a taste of what arms can do. It's a lot of these things on the left here: instrument placement on the surface, payload placement, pointing, sample acquisition, delivery, caching. All these things have been done. Probing and trenching. Um, Releasing volatiles is something we're starting to get excited about on the SAMPLR mission, where you actually disturb the soil and watch and see if anything boils off. Do that. And then lots of things you can do with imaging of the surface. We have microscopic imagers on a lot of these arms, which I think the next talk will get into more. But you can also image the vehicle itself, which for scientific purposes, but lots of engineering value there. Panorama views everyone loves, and the selfies as well are not just for PR, although that's a huge benefit as well. But really, I think where robotic arms shine is the multi-purpose nature. If you already have a multi-degree of freedom system on the surface, it's already accurate. Already has cameras and force torque sensors. Many cases, we're already doing assembly tasks even on space station and NASA's OSAM missions coming up. So to me, the question is more, what can't you do with a robotic arm? And that's a slightly different perspective, but you can actually simplify a lot of other vehicle systems if they can utilize the capabilities of a robotic arm and they don't have to do it themselves. So maintenance and servicing, orbital replacement units, so you can actually upgrade your payloads or swap out things that have malfunctioned. We've done that, like on the Hubble Space Telescope, for example, space station. Prior talk mentioned tool change. There's a lot of interest in how can you move or clean dust from the vehicle. How can you reconfigure the vehicle, not just once you land and need to deploy, but then if you need to survive the night, how can you configure for the night, adjust your thermal properties. An arm doesn't have to just be a pointing device, and you don't have to necessarily do continual pointing. You could point something in one direction or however long it needs, and then you could come back to it, reposition it, repoint it. It's science. Obviously, a lot of ISRU applications, crew assist. We've even talked about some of these small rovers. Can we help them recharge so they can keep going? It's also, I view it not just as robotic arms, but robotic appendages of all types, legs, landing legs, suspension systems. They're all very applicable. Just two really quick examples I wanted to give here of multi-purpose nature. The main mission for Phoenix was to deploy some instruments on the surface, or sorry, for InSight, was to deploy instruments on the surface here. But then the mole had a hard time digging, and the robotic arm was actually used to help it advance into the surface. We did several different tasks, robotic arm. On CLIPS, we actually, we were manifested as just sort of a standalone payload, but as soon as everyone realized they had a robotic arm they could use, everyone wanted to leverage that. And so we ended up placing almost all the science instruments in proximity to the arm so they could view what we were doing. They could see if volatiles boiled off. We could present samples in their field of view. And then in the case of Heimdall, we actually integrated their cameras on the end of the arm, which wasn't part of the original. Um, so here's SAMPLR. Speaking of, it's really our Gen 2 productized version of the Mars Exploration Instrument Deployment Device. Um, it's because we productized it, it's more affordable, it's and more rapidly reconfigured and tested. To me, that's what really enables this new exploration and science on them. It's also a fully integrated system, so it's bolted on and you plug it in. It doesn't depend on computers or anything else except for the com link to the ground. We don't have our own comms. Um, we can even script. We can even take our own images, store those images, script our motions. All that gets passed through to the ground through the lander is the lander's power. That's really it. Otherwise, we're pretty independent. The other unique thing on SAMPLR is it's commercially operated. It's not a NASA operated payload. We have our own station control. Be doing our operations, so that's pretty exciting. So as I said, we're landing on the South Pole in 2023 on Eclipse 19C, right on the edge of Hayworth crater. We have very similar to the last presentation. We have a penetrometer. This one's from Colorado School of Mines, and they're doing some very interesting things with detecting composition of the soil and possibly even water ice if there were water ice there. I don't think there necessarily will be in this location. And a scoop with integral sieves so that we can get different particle distributions using the sieves. We also have avionics at the end of arms so we can accommodate other payloads like the Heimdall cameras. In addition to the avionics at the base in our own cameras. This shows one camera, but we actually have two. And there, it's all sort of self-contained. So on the right here, we're almost done. Flight article is built. We're just now outfitting it with thermal blankets and starting the environmental test. So this slide I could probably talk about forever, but I'll try to walk through it quickly here. But this is some of the things I think are really good takeaways for this group. The first technical lesson really is that a lot of our experience is very applicable. There are solutions. There's multiple NASA centers. There's multiple commercial companies that have worked on this and have solutions. It doesn't have to be a bespoke solution like Mars. It doesn't have to be quite as highly optimized. The moon has several advantages, including getting mass to the surface, and that's getting more and more true. It has more than double the solar irradiance. It has less than half the gravity, and much less latency in your comm. So that actually helps in a lot of ways. Big difference on the moon for us is the thermal environment, but we have a lot of things that help you there as well. We have actually pretty low energy consumption. Total energy by a robotic arm is typically very little because it's low duty cycle. You're not using the arm 24/7, so the doesn't drive battery size necessarily. It also is helpful that we have motors and they generate their own heat when operating. And on the moon, blankets are extremely effective. And so when you're operating, it's actually not that challenging of a thermal problem, even at the South Pole and the cold temperatures. At night, if you're not operating, most components can have cold, capable non-op temperatures. But one challenge is when you're operating, you're warm. You're not operating, you're very cold. That may actually require two different sort of thermal configurations. Another strength with robotic arms is you can actually use your robotic arm to configure or stow in a position, so you can leverage those strengths that you already have. The other big one I recommend to people is, invest in very early life testing, especially if the SAMPLR right now is just one lunar day. We weren't too worried about life. TV, they're talking 10-year missions, dust environment, and the cold drivers on life. Dry lubricants can do the colder temperatures, but they also reduce your life. So we have quite a bit of experience with those on Mars, challenges associated with those. And there's trades there. You can work really hard to extend the life of systems, or if you have a robotic arm or crew visiting the surface, they could actually change out certain systems like that have high wear components like wheels, or certain, some cameras aren't quite as rad hard as your other systems, so you can consider changing out certain systems as well. We're also partnered with NASA on dust mitigation. Would help extend the life of solar systems for the LVSAT project. One thing we learned is, the electronics exist for large part, like Mars and Geo. Maxar has dozens of satellites in Geo, which is a very harsh radiation environment. So we're leveraging a lot of that experience. We don't have to necessarily reinvent the electronics. There's definitely trades on where you place your electronics. It's nice to place them at the base of the arm, all in one warm closure. As you get to really long robotic arms, like 4 meters in length, then you talking where you start thinking about distributed electronics. It's more beneficial. I'm going to try and skip through some of these, but one thing we noticed on SAMPLR was the interactive nature of robotics is a big difference from other payloads. Some payloads command and come back to them and get the data later, but robotics, you really want to plan, get the data, replan. You want more COM windows. You typically need tools on the ground, to do that planning, and you typically need infrastructure to help you with that, facilities to help with that as well. Robotics are also a little bit complicated, so we found it's very helpful to have a fully integrated system where one person is responsible, sort of the belly button for that. And we ended up developing our own in-house motor controller electronics because we had problems with vendors in the past. So we brought that in-house as well. Programmatically, I just want to make sure people understand this is now becoming really affordable. We're doing this for about 1/5 of the cost on SAMPLR. For me, it's hard to imagine not using robots, but when you go talk to payloads and Eclipse lander providers, they say, yeah, we'd love to use your systems, but where's the demand? Who's going to pay for it? It's sort of a chicken and the egg problem. So I think NASA has a very critical role to play there.
All right,
Pushing us through that.
Sean, thanks. I think we're gonna, if you're all right, we're gonna wrap up and go to our next speaker. But you do have a couple comments or questions in the chat, so if you have a second to go through and address those in the chat, that would be really great. But we do need to move on to our next.
Yeah, my pleasure. I really thank you for the time, and I'll check out the comments.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And we do also have time at the end again for questions and answers if you can stick around.